This is Time Warner Cable's local edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. You know him well. He is John Pitney. He is a professor of government at Claremont McKenna College. And boy, it's been a fun year to cover politics in the United States of America. And who would have thunk that the California primary in June may actually play a role in selecting the nominees of the various parties? How did we get here?
Well, California really hasn't been the decisive primary since 1964. That's when Barry Goldwater defeated Nelson Rockefeller, and in those days it was winner take all statewide. So when Goldwater won California by a very narrow margin, he got all the delegates and took a giant leap toward the nomination.
But what about in '68 with Bobby? I mean, I know obviously he was killed that day, but was that a decisive win for him?
We'll never know. We'll never know because the delegate count at the time indicated that Hubert Humphrey was still going to win the nomination, even though he hadn't entered a single primary or caucus. And of course, that's why the system changed. People were very upset after the convention that he hadn't won any nomination, won any caucuses, and still got the nomination.
So let's talk about 2016. How is it that, at least on the Republican side, it appears that California could be decisive? I mean, you would think that with all these contests, someone would have come up through the ranks and garnered a majority.
Well, Donald Trump is way ahead in the delegate count. Polls have indicated that he has been the first choice of Republican voters nationwide, but there is intense opposition to Donald Trump. He is the least popular front runner in the history of polling, and a lot of Republicans are very hesitant, thinking we nominate Donald Trump, we're going to take a bath down the ballot.
And what do you think?
And if he were the nominee, it would be a disaster for the Republican Party. Oh, yes. If for no other reason, and Tony Quinn has a great piece on this a while back.
Republican, right?
Yes.
Right, Tony Quinn, Republican.
In Fox and Hounds, it would add enormously to the Democratic vote in California. You're going to get many, many Hispanics who aren't yet registered to vote. They're going to register to vote.
Do you truly believe that we will see Hispanic turnout rise if we see a Clinton-Trump election in November?
I don't think there's any real doubt about it because Hispanic citizens have tended to underperform when it comes to registering and turning out to vote. About 48% of Hispanic citizens turn out to vote as opposed to about 64% of non-Hispanic whites. And if it gets closer to the non-Hispanic white level, that's going to make a big difference in a state like California.
So let's talk more about down ballot then. We do have some races coming up. We have a U.S. Senate race, for example. The general view is that it's likely the Democrat will win that race regardless. But what about some of these races in Congress, Assembly, Senate? They had seemed fairly static. But could we see Republicans fall that normally would not fall because of the Trump effect?
It's quite possible. There are a number of districts in Northern California. You've got Jeff Denham, David Valadao, very large Hispanic communities. And if there is big Democratic turnout in those districts, they have a problem. Here in Southern California, the difference is that there are a couple of seats that Republicans were hoping to be competitive in. Aguilar, Ruiz. If Trump is the nominee, no, not going to happen.
What about in the state legislature? Have you followed that much?
State legislature, Democrats are in a very, very strong position. The only question is whether they're going to be able to pick up a couple of more seats. I don't think there's going to be a dramatic turnover in the legislature because they've got most of the seats already.
So let's talk about other states, because we look at states in the South, for example, that are overwhelmingly Republican. Could we see states like Georgia, North Carolina, could they all of a sudden fall into the Democratic column come President's Election Day?
North Carolina, that wouldn't even be science fiction. Barack Obama carried North Carolina in 2008 and just missed in 2012. Georgia, you have a very, very large African-American community in the Atlanta area, growing Hispanic community in Georgia, lots of white professionals. One could easily see in a Clinton-Trump race, Hillary Clinton carrying that state.
Any other states in the South that you think could be ripe for Hillary Clinton?
Florida.
Well, that presumably, but I don't consider that the South. I know that's fair. What about states, though, that were Democratic states that could start tipping the other way. I think about Pennsylvania, for example. Could there be Trump Democrats that cause Pennsylvania to go into the toss-up column?
Trump is probably going to increase some of the white working class turnout in Pennsylvania, but here's the problem for Republicans: African American turnout. If he's on the ballot, Democrats know how to remind African Americans of some of the things he said.
Has he been, because I wonder, look, Barack Obama obviously ran up huge margins amongst African Americans, over 90%. I mean, if Trump could pull 20% of African Americans,
oh, I don't think
you don't see it happening.
No, because among other things, he's retweeted material from Nazis, long history of raising questions about President Obama's birthplace.
Yes.
And that's going to be very offensive to African Americans. So I don't see him
what does this say to you? What does this election say to you about the state of the Republican Party, the state of America?
Some very disturbing things. Donald Trump is tapping into an anger, some of which is very legitimate. There is a lot of economic distress in America. The political classes haven't had good answers about what to do about it. But there's another side to it, nativism, prejudice. And we always knew it was there, but we didn't know it would drive votes to the extent that it has.
Let me ask you about Mrs. Clinton. Presumably she'll be the nominee, but it's been a rockier ride than one would have expected. Why has that happened with Mrs. Clinton's candidacy?
One, questions about ethics. The email controversy, I doubt that one American in 100 could tell you exactly what that's about, but they know something is amiss there. And it reaches back to a whole series of controversies dating to the 1990s.
Do you think that's been a problem for Democratic primary voters?
I think it's on their minds that Hillary Clinton is connected with the establishment, that she has financial ties to the establishment.
What happens with Bernie Sanders? Because whether a Democrat likes him or not, to the extent they would vote for him, I think there's an appreciation for the issues he's brought up by Democratic voters.
And what's remarkable, he's a self-identified socialist.
Right. Who would have thunk?
Yeah, and a few years ago, they said that's poison. But
so what happens to him? Does he join a Clinton administration? Where does his voice go? Where do his people go?
He's going to have a lot to say at the convention. In the end, if Hillary Clinton is the nominee, he'll end up supporting her.
Right.
But he's going to be a powerful voice for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, eclipsing people like Elizabeth Warren.
Right. So I presume you believe Mrs. Clinton will be the victor in November. Does the Senate stay in Republican hands, or does it flip to the Democrats?
If Donald Trump is the nominee, I would not bet that the Senate stays in Republican hands. There are a number of close races. Democrats are likely to pick up seats in Illinois and Wisconsin.
Right.
With Trump,
Pennsylvania, Ohio.
And there could be a couple of surprises
Florida.
too.
What about the House? Is there enough discontent that the House could flip to the Democrats?
That's a tougher sell for the Democrats because a lot of the districts are heavily weighted in favor of the Republicans. But if Trump is as unpopular as the early polls suggest, anything is possible.
His name is John Pitney. He is a professor of government at Claremont McKenna College. I'm Brad Pomerance. It's Time Warner Cable's Local Edition.